So I know I've been focusing on more serious critical analysis on my channel lately, but I have to get this out of my system. Ew. Ew. Burn it with fire! Ma'am, please put those away. There are children watching. So, yeah, Pandora's Tower. This was a long time coming. It's one of the 3 games released under Operation Rainfall, the fan movement that brought 3 obscure Wii JRPGs to the West. This, Xenoblade Chronicles, and The Last Story. The latter 2 I have covered on this channel. I'll leave links to the videos I made on them in the description. You should totally watch them when you have the chance. They're good videos, I swear. In any case, Pandora's Tower had seen mild success in its release and is generally considered the strangest of the 3 Operation Rainfall games. Where The Last Story and Xenoblade can be considered fairly straightforward JRPGs, with some slight gimmicks in their gameplay, Pandora's Tower is far removed from even that. It's difficult to sum up my experience with this title in a concise manner, but if there's one word I'd be able to call it, it's eclectic? Maybe? Pandora's Tower is an amalgamation of various subgenres of action RPG games, and to be frank, it blatantly steals ideas from a number of its contemporaries. Like, it really doesn't try to hide it. This game is a mixture of Shadow of the Colossus, The Legend of Zelda, God of War, and Wii Sports. Oh, and also it's a dating sim. It has dungeon crawling elements similar to Zelda games, its combat is a watered down God of War, and it contains boss fights and story progression nearly mirroring Shadow of the Colossus. This game definitely presents itself as a jack of all trades as a result. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and many of you are likely asking, what is Pandora's Tower? Pandora's Tower follows the tale of 2 star-crossed lovers, Aaron and Elena. The game opens up with Elena singing at her kingdom, Illyria's Harvest Festival. During her performance, she becomes afflicted with a mysterious curse that places a marking on her back. Upon seeing this, the Illyrian army begins attacking her. Aaron then takes her and they attempt to flee when they're approached by a sinister-looking old woman named Mavda, who quickly offers the couple refuge in a way to attempt to lift the curse that has plagued Elena. She explains that the curse is causing Elena to slowly transform into a monster. In order to offset the curse, she instructs Aaron to travel to an area called the Scar and traverse its 13 towers. She claims that the only way to cure Elena is to feed her flesh from each tower's master. Arming him with an ancient weapon called the Oralcus Chain, Aaron sets off to the towers in order to attempt to lift the curse. And thus the basic layout for the story is presented to us. This is where the game's closest and most obvious comparison to Shadow of the Colossus rears itself. The game's basic structure essentially mimics that game. Aaron attempting to save Elena is a direct parallel to Wander attempting to save Mono. Each master contains some gimmick that requires using the chain in a unique way, much like how each Colossus required the player to use the game's physics and climbing in a specific way. We'll get more into the gameplay a bit later, but keep in mind this game's approach to its main crux of gameplay, the chain. Getting back to the story and world, Pandora's Tower has a narrative that is usually indirectly told to the player through flavor text and the occasional flashback scene. The main way you'll connect with the game's world and characters is through the ancient text you'll find scattered throughout each of the towers and in certain locations in the game. This game does a fantastic job of incentivizing players to collect these too, since they're a player's main source of income, as Mavda will pay the player substantial amounts of currency in exchange for the text. Most of what you'll gather from these texts is an understanding of the nature of the world and how everything came to be. There's a lot to this game's backstory, so bear with me as I attempt to explain it. Essentially, nearly 500 years before the events of the story, Followers of Ios, the game's main religion, and the Vestra, the race that Mavda comes from, attempted to create 12 masters for the towers using human vessels. Then by fusing the 12 masters into 2 final vessels, a man and a woman, they attempted to unify them and create the final master. A woman named Zeron and her husband had volunteered to become the final vessels after the death of their son, Reuben, who had been trampled by knights on their horses and had left them stricken with grief. Unfortunately, Zeron had turned out to be pregnant with her husband's child, who also turns out to be an ancestor of Aaron, forcing them to stop the experiment. They were able to save the husband and child, but were unable to save Zeron. She then became an incomplete master and was sealed away along with the 12 masters, but not before placing a curse on the lovers of her husband's descendants, which is what caused the curse Elena received to begin with. 460 years later, the Illyrian army attempted to recreate the experiment, intending to use the 12 masters to turn them into living weapons. This freed Zeron and set the game's events into place. This game has a surprisingly complex narrative and world for how linear it is. Outside of the observatory and the meticulously designed towers, there's no exploration present in this game whatsoever, and it could easily be beaten in 15 hours. Despite this, the game does its best to create a rather deep world and lore with its central characters, and I honestly commend it for that. I don't think that the overarching plot was anything special though, as it mainly served as a commentary on human beings' incessant desires for war and the sacrifice of our heroes in order to break the cycle of violence and death that ensues as a result of said war. I think the game would have done a much better job of keeping me engaged if the plot and backstory was more directly told to me or was presented in a more compact and eventful manner. As much as I like world building through flavor text, when the bulk of your game relies on that, it leaves a lack of impact when all the plot's cards begin to fall. But as complex as the game's plot is, it's not the main draw and most unique aspect of Pandora's Tower. The gameplay is. So what do I think of that? Well, I kinda liked it, but not all of the time. Let me explain. So the main form of gameplay revolves around usage of the chain that Aaron receives, and its application is honestly hit or miss. Early on, I noticed a lot of really strong and abusable uses for the chain in combat that were provided. The game first teaches you that the chain is used to collect resources from dead enemies, but it also becomes your main combat tool, and I honestly don't think that's intended. With the chain, you can swing enemies around to hit others nearby. You can throw them into walls and down stairs. You can even pull on enemies with the chain until the bar at the bottom fills up to deal massive damage. All of these approaches to gameplay easily outdamage any of the weapons that you'll actually receive, and that's unfortunate because you do get a few upgradable weapons, and the developers obviously wanted you to use them, but in my experience there was very little reason to use anything other than the chain, since it does a ton of damage, has the most range, and can clear out a room the most quickly. Also, upgrading weapons requires certain resources to be collected that could be better used for other game mechanics that I'll get into later, whereas the chain gets upgraded every time you beat a master. Not to mention the regular weapons don't even directly damage the masters to begin with, so yeah, the combat felt flawed and unfocused in my opinion. The chain is also used for puzzle solving, and when I ascended the first few towers, I thought the game had presented some really cool and unique applications for it outside of combat, with some puzzles requiring that you use the chain to access something from a distance, pull certain levers, pull out platforms, and traverse various areas by swinging across them. Sometimes you had to carry across fire with the chain in order to light a torch nearby, or tether the chain to one object in order to hold another in place. It wasn't until maybe the 6th or 7th tower that I saw the game begin to run out of ideas and motifs. Many of the later towers began recycling ideas without really making them any more difficult, instead only having them take longer and become more tedious to complete. This transitions into a larger complaint I have with the design of this game's towers and your intended ways of traversing them, and that is the sheer amount of backtracking they require you to do, and how brutally this game punishes you for making the tiniest of mistakes. What do I mean by this? Well, the game requires you to constantly head back to Elena, as the curse does slowly begin to set on her over time as you traverse these towers. This is represented by the circular icon in the bottom left corner. Once that bar empties, she'll be consumed by the curse and the game is over. You'll collect different types of flesh from monsters that you encounter, and until you get a limited and rare item that allows you to fast travel, you're expected to solve a portion of many of these towers, then walk your ass all the way back to the entrance, give flesh to Elena, and then walk all the way back to the spot you were at before. In most cases, this wasn't a huge problem, since very often the towers would give you shortcuts back to the entrance that would minimize travel time back and forth. But very certain towers lack this, and these towers ended up being the longest by a long shot. Specifically, the Torrent Peak, True Gold, and Treetop Towers were the most egregious in this. It doesn't help that every time you enter these towers again, new, more powerful enemies spawn, making it harder to skip past them to save time. This made many aspects of traversal feel like a slog, and it dragged out the game to points where I had to stop playing for large periods of time because it just got tiring. Now, I'm aware that many of the towers can actually be done in one trip, but you're often incentivized to revisit towers and complete them in multiple trips because of a game mechanic I haven't mentioned yet, so keep that in mind. Yes, you technically can beat the game without backtracking, but the game punishes you for doing that, so I didn't do it. As I mentioned, the design of these towers also brutally punishes you for making small mistakes, and it honestly frustrated me more times than I could count. Nothing makes me more angry than messing up one tiny jump and falling down 4 floors in the tower, only to have to climb your way back up. Oh, did you get in a combat encounter with an enemy that pushed you off the ledge? Have fun climbing back up, fucker! What doesn't help is that there's a few moments where the game wants you to take a leap of faith into certain areas, which is stupid, because you're often punished for blindly jumping down holes, unless the game intends for you to. Either way, it's really poor design to send mixed messages like that to the players. Moving on from that, let's talk about the Masters. They're a lot of fun actually. Some are easily more memorable than others. The True Gold, Dusk and Dawn, and Wellspring Steeple Towers easily come to mind in that regard. But some of them are either really dull or just seem to exist to waste the player's time. With masters like those in the Blazing Citadel and Crimson Keep, you're just kinda standing around waiting for an opening most of the time. Then there's the clusterfuck that's the Ironclad Turret and Arcadian Tower boss fights that really just felt directionless. My favorite master is probably the last one, the Dusk and Dawn Master. In this fight you fight the last 2 masters at once, and throughout the fight you need to figure out ways to have them weaken each other since they can only harm one another, and then finish them both off together within a small time frame. It's unique and I really liked it. I also enjoyed the Rockshard Rampart fight since it seemed to be the one with the most tasteful and well-designed use of both the weapon and chain in conjunction with one another. Overall, the masters were pretty cool. I like them for sure, and some of them became some of my favorite aspects of this game easily. Alright, I've been holding it off for long enough. There's one game mechanic that I've neglected to mention up until this point, and it's the one I honestly despise the most, and that's the romancing mechanic with Elena. Now, as I mentioned prior to this game, it's a part dating sim, but it's really not a complex or a good one, in my opinion. This game essentially tells you early on that in order to get the best ending, you must raise your bond with Elena. How do you do this, you may ask? You shower her with gifts, plain and simple. Elena will happily accept a gift that isn't considered an ugly item like a monster bone, but certain gifts that you can buy from Mavda, like potted plants, will make her go wild. Gifts aren't the only way that you can increase your bond with Elena though. Just spending time with her in every in-game hour means you can also help with that too. I ended up spending an absurd amount of my money on gifts for her and spent numerous days between dungeons exhausting every dialogue option in 24-hour periods with Elena throughout my adventure. I was grinding to get the best possible ending throughout my entire game. Do you know what affinity level I got her at by the end of the game? 7.
What? What the fuck?
7 out of 10. You need to be at least 9 affinity to get the best ending. Yes, I was mad. Now listen, it's not purely the fault of the mechanic that I couldn't get the best ending, but it's the egregious requirements that definitely didn't help. After the 50th potted plant I gave her, I was beside myself. Why don't you just love me, Elena? Love me! I wasted far too many resources trying to raise my affinity with her. A number of these resources I rationalized were not necessary. Things like mercury and ores that could be used for weapon upgrades. Just give them to Elena instead. I mean, you got the chain. Sometimes I just sold shit I knew she wouldn't like for money to buy her gifts I knew she would like. As I mentioned prior, the game also incentivizes you with this mechanic to constantly backtrack in the towers. Your affinity with Elena raises every time you give her beast flesh. If her gauge falls below 25%, her affinity goes down. So of course you want to avoid staying in the towers too long and want to give her as much flesh as possible.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the fuck are your parents? Who are your parents?
Also, you can only feed her one piece of flesh at a time, and after you enter the dungeon again, all remaining flesh you gather dries up and becomes useless, meaning that if you want to feed her more flesh, you have to fight enemies and waste your time in the towers, which means more back and forth and over and over and over and over and over. It was frustrating, and the result I was left with, because of certain game-breaking circumstances, only made me hate this mechanic more. As for the actual love story dynamic between Elena and Aaron, I thought it was cute. I liked how Elena progresses as a character the more you hang out with her, and I also enjoy how depending on what items you give her, she'll change her daily habits. If you give her a lot of plants and seeds, she'll spend more time in the garden. If you give her more drapes and blankets, she'll stay in the living room more. She even has her own schedule and routine. She prepares lunch and dinner for you at specific hours, and she always goes to sleep at midnight. I also enjoy how Aaron is a mainly silent protagonist outside of major story events, and the game even pokes a few jabs at this trope. The fact that Aaron essentially only speaks up during the game's endings does leave a profound impact on me, but I do wish his English VA was a little bit better for the limited time we hear it. Aside from that, I felt the game really needed to put more on Elena's personality with how much we're expected to talk to her. I heard her repeat the same few lines about how she's always loved to sing and how she can't cook far too many times. On a side note, I find it to be a strange coincidence that all of the Operation Rainfall games have stories that revolve around the main character falling in love with some girl and the plot centers around their actions. It's only strange to me considering how they were all developed by different studios that had nothing to do with one another, but I digress. Now, I largely liked my time with Pandora's Tower up until a certain point in the game, and this point drained a lot of the fun from the title for me and is ultimately why I'm so critical of the title now. Many of you may not know, but the North American version of Pandora's Tower contains a very common and easy to trigger game-breaking bug near the end of the game. This bug triggered for me, and at first I had no idea what caused it. Once I obtained access to Towers 11 and 12, the Dusk and Dawn Towers, I had done the logical thing and attempted to enter Tower 11, the Dawn Tower, first. Immediately as I loaded into the tower, the game crashed. And it crashed every time I entered the tower, and I had no clue as to why. At first I thought it was my game disc, but after some online sleuthing, it turns out I discovered a rather common glitch in this version, but mine was unique from the others. Many people claim that they couldn't re-enter the towers after their first excursion, causing them to have to finish it in one run. I could not even load into the 11th tower on my first attempt. It was through this that I discovered that these two towers are actually technically one tower that you use portals on the ground to traverse through. They each shared the same layout, and it's intended for you to finish them both at the same time. With that knowledge, I had decided to enter the Dusk Tower first instead, and then from there enter the Dawn Tower. It ended up working, and from there I thought I was good. I figured if I had any other problems, I could just do that. Enter the Dusk Tower first. Then I had attempted to re-enter the towers after giving Elena some flesh and gifts, and I realized that I couldn't enter either, or even load in from any other tower. It would crash every time I attempted to load in these two towers regardless of context.
Stupid, I'm not gonna let you get the chance.
For a little while, I was just beside myself. I didn't know what to do. I thought I wasn't going to beat this game. That's when I tested something based on one of the posts I had read. I decided to reload my save, and I only gave Elena flesh. Nothing more. It worked. Here is where my problem with the affinity system really arose. I wasn't able to give any of my rewards or gifts to Elena following any of my excursions into these two towers. In fact, I couldn't give her any gifts at this point, period. Once I got the flesh from the final two masters, I was forced to give those to her, meaning I couldn't give Elena anything else once I beat the towers. Giving Elena the final two pieces of master flesh triggers the game's point of no return, meaning whatever affinity level I had at that point is what I am left with, meaning I was soft locked into this ending. I couldn't get the best ending because of a glitch that I didn't know existed until I encountered it. Many people theorize that this glitch occurs because the game's trying to load these two towers at once, and doing anything prior to entering the towers overloads the game's memory or some shit. I don't know, I'm not a game developer. All I know is that a crippling flaw like this in the North American version of this game is unforgivable, and plagued much of my late game experience with this title. Honestly, I liked this game enough up until this point, but this glitch pretty much removed any desire I have to touch this game again. It was too frustrating. If you ever plan on playing Pandora's Tower, please do not play the North American version. So at this point in the video, I'm going to talk about the endings. So you got a few minutes. If you don't want to be spoiled, just skip to a timestamp I'm going to leave in the video here. Going to give you 5 seconds, okay? 5, 4, 3, 2. If you haven't skipped it yet, it's your fault. Okay, yeah. Pandora's Tower has 6 possible endings. The ending I had gotten was ending A. In my ending, Elena explains that Zeron still lives inside her, and she decides to sacrifice herself by jumping into the scar. Aaron claims that she can't do it alone, so they both jump in and off themselves together, Romeo and Juliet style. The other 5 possible endings all have unique twists to them. Ending E, the worst one, occurs if you return to Elena too late at any point in the game. She turns into an unseen monster and kills Aaron as he enters the observatory. On a side note, I actually really like that you don't get to see what Elena looks like when she's fully transformed like this, because it just kind of adds that mystery and suspense, and it's really creepy, and I dig it. I like horror movie shit like that. She then goes to lead an army of monsters that plans to unite the land. Ending D occurs if you have 2 affinity with Elena after the 9th tower. After getting the 9th piece of Master Flesh, she attacks Aaron, and in retaliation he kills her. Stricken with the grief of what he'd done, Aaron then kills himself, and they're both just forgotten. Ending C occurs if you have 3 to 4 affinity, and in this ending, Elena enters a monstrous state before Aaron's able to give her the last 2 pieces of flesh. After fighting her, they're both captured by Illyrian forces. Aaron is then forced to use Elena in her monster form as a weapon to unite the world under Illyria's order. Ending B occurs when you have 5 to 6 affinity and is essentially the ending I got, the only difference being that Elena jumps into the scar by herself. In the best ending, ending S, Elena is fully purged of the curse, and Mavda sacrifices herself in order to seal the 13 towers, and Aaron and Elena live happily ever after. So yeah, that was Pandora's Tower. It was a lot to have to deal with. I'll be honest with you guys, considering the circumstances in which I played this game, I probably wouldn't have beaten it if I was playing it on my own without having to cover it on my YouTube channel. What were my overall thoughts on this title? Well, there are some things that I enjoyed about the title. I like the bits of lore scattered throughout the game. Some of the master fights were cool, and the game did a solid job of presenting its chain mechanic and using it effectively. I also did enjoy Aaron and Elena's romance despite my hatred for the affinity system. My consensus on Pandora's Tower is largely similar to that of the last story. Your enjoyment of this game will heavily hinge on if you care about this game's world, its characters, and lore. But overall, this game is blemished by numerous inconsistencies. It's blemished by uninspired level and boss design. It's blemished by its incessant desire for backtracking. It's blemished by its game-breaking glitches and gameplay imbalances, and all of these things really add up and make it a tough experience for me to recommend. So yeah, sorry to anyone who expected me to really like this game. I wanted to, and there are things that I do like about it, but the experience I had ended up being tainted by so many things that it became hard for me to understand if I only hated some things but liked the core of the game, or if I hated the core of the game and only liked some things. In any case, thanks for watching. Not sure what I'm gonna do next. I'm kinda running out of games to play.